This single strand of hair sent Claude Jones to his death.
There were FBI whistleblowers in the 90s or in the 80s that started saying that their practices were unscientific.
Texas executed him in 2000 for shooting a liquor store owner during a robbery.
We can say happened for sure is they had a lot of evidence that another man did it.
The hair found at the crime scene was the only physical evidence linking him to the murder. 10 years after his execution, DNA testing finally proved what Jones had claimed all along. The hair wasn't his.
Did it, right?
Case closed.
Actually, there were 5 hairs. 3 were from a cook.
It belonged to the victim. But by then, Claude Jones was already dead. November 14, 1989, Zell's liquor store in Point Blank, Texas. Owner Alan Hilzendager is shot 3 times at close range. A customer outside sees a man with a dark ponytail enter the store, hears gunshots, then watches the man flee with the cash register. The small community of Point Blank, with fewer than 700 residents, was shaken by the brutal murder. San Jacinto County had seen few homicides, and the killing of a well-known local business owner sent waves of fear through the tight-knit community. The pressure on law enforcement to solve the case quickly was immense. Police recover a single strand of hair from the counter. They arrest Claude Jones and his accomplice Timothy Mark Jordan based on a tip from Jordan's girlfriend. Both men have dark ponytails. Both deny being inside the store. Jordan cuts a deal, testifying against Jones in exchange for a lighter sentence. Claude Jones was no stranger to the criminal justice system. At 60 years old, he had a lengthy criminal record dating back to the 1950s, including armed robbery and assault. This history made him an easy target for prosecution, despite his insistence that he wasn't involved in the Hilzendager murder. His prior convictions were prominently featured during his trial, potentially prejudicing the jury against him before any evidence was presented. Prosecution's case hinges on 3 things. 1. Jordan's testimony that Jones confessed to the shooting. 2. A second accomplice who waited in the car. 3. A single strand of hair found at the crime scene.
Using a stereo microscope that renders the fiber evidence in 3 dimensions, Peterson analyzed fibers culled from the crime scenes.
Without the hair, there's no physical evidence placing Jones inside the store. The second accomplice, Carrie Dixon, initially told investigators that Jordan was the one who entered the store. Later, he changed his story, claiming Jones went inside. This inconsistency was never adequately explained at trial. Dixon received immunity for his testimony against Jones, giving him a strong incentive to cooperate with prosecutors regardless of the truth. In 1990, DNA testing of hair wasn't widely available. Instead, experts used microscopic hair comparison, literally looking at hairs under a microscope and making subjective judgments. At trial, a forensic expert testified the hair was consistent with Jones's hair. He told the jury this meant the hair could only have come from about 1 in 100 people. What the jury didn't know, this type of analysis has been thoroughly debunked. The FBI now acknowledges microscopic hair comparison has an error rate of over 90%. The forensic expert who testified, Stephen Robertson, had conducted thousands of hair comparisons throughout his career. He presented himself as an authority, using scientific-sounding language that impressed the jury. However, he had no way to quantify the statistical probability of a match. The 1 in 100 figure was essentially made up, with no scientific basis. This type of testimony has since been recognized as a form of junk science that's contributed to numerous wrongful convictions across the country. Dr. Maria Queller, forensic scientist, said, "Saying a hair is consistent with someone is scientifically meaningless. It's like saying 2 people both have brown eyes. It narrows things down slightly, but proves nothing about identity." The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before finding Jones guilty. He was sentenced to death. From death row, Jones maintained his innocence. His appeals focused on the unreliability of his co-defendant's testimony. Timothy Jordan, who received a lighter sentence for testifying against Jones, later recanted, saying he lied to save himself. The second accomplice gave conflicting statements about who went into the store. Jordan's recantation came in 1997, 7 years after Jones was convicted. In a sworn affidavit, he stated that he had falsely implicated Jones to avoid the death penalty himself. Despite this crucial development, courts refused to grant Jones a new trial, citing procedural rules that limit when new evidence can be considered. This highlights one of the most problematic aspects of the appeals process. Truth often takes a backseat to procedural technicalities. In his final appeals, Jones begged for DNA testing of the hair, the only physical evidence against him. Modern DNA technology could definitively prove whether it was his. His requests were denied. Courts ruled the hair evidence wasn't significant enough to warrant testing. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which denied Jones' request for DNA testing, has historically been one of the most conservative appellate courts in the country when it comes to death penalty cases. Between 1995 and 2000, it denied relief in 194 out of 197 death penalty appeals, a rejection rate of 98.5%. Critics argue this reflects a systemic bias toward upholding convictions rather than ensuring justice. In December 2000, Jones' attorneys made a last-minute plea to then-Governor George W. Bush, asking for a 30-day stay to conduct DNA testing. The memo never reached Bush. His legal team failed to mention the DNA testing request, instead summarizing the case as having no outstanding issues. Bush was in the midst of the contested 2000 presidential election during Jones's final days. His attention was divided, and he relied heavily on his legal team to properly brief him on clemency requests. The failure to mention the DNA testing request represents a catastrophic breakdown in the clemency process, the last safeguard against executing an innocent person. December 7, 2000. After 11 years on death row, Claude Jones' time had run out. His final meal? Fried chicken, French fries, and a Coke. Jones maintained his innocence until the end. His last words, spoken to his attorney, "I want the public to know I'm not guilty. I didn't kill the liquor store owner." At 8:43 p.m., Claude Jones was pronounced dead by lethal injection. The hair that convicted him remained in a Texas evidence locker, untested. The lethal injection protocol used to execute Jones consisted of 3 drugs: sodium thiopental, an anesthetic, pancuronium bromide, a paralytic, and potassium chloride, which stops the heart. This combination has since been challenged as potentially causing excruciating pain if the anesthetic fails to work properly. The prisoner, paralyzed by the second drug, would be unable to signal their distress. Jones's execution occurred without incident, but the method itself has been the subject of numerous legal challenges. In 2007, the Innocence Project and the Texas Observer filed a lawsuit to test the hair. After 3 years of legal battles, a judge finally ordered the testing. The results were definitive. The hair did not belong to Claude Jones. It belonged to the victim, Alan Hilsendager. The DNA testing was conducted by Mitotyping Technologies, a private laboratory specializing in mitochondrial DNA analysis. The lab's director, Dr. Terry Melton, personally oversaw the testing and confirmed the results with 100% certainty. The hair shared the same mitochondrial DNA profile as Alan Hilsendager and could not have come from Claude Jones. This scientific certainty stands in stark contrast to the vague "consistent with" testimony that helped send Jones to his death. Barry Scheck said, "This is the first time in history we have DNA evidence proving that a person was executed based on false forensic testimony. The single piece of physical evidence linking Jones to the crime scene was simply wrong." Former prosecutor Tim Curry said, "Without that hair, I don't think we would have even taken the case to trial. There would have been nothing placing Jones inside the store." Claude Jones' son Dwayne was 12 when his father was arrested. By the time the DNA results came back, he was 33. Dwayne Jones said, "They executed my father based on a lie. A single hair that wasn't even his. How's that justice?" Dwayne Jones grew up without a father, visiting him occasionally on death row. Despite their limited contact, they maintained a relationship through letters and phone calls. After learning about the DNA results, Duane became an advocate against the death penalty. A single strand of hair, a man's life, a truth discovered 10 years too late. Claude Jones's case forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Our justice system values finality over accuracy. Once the execution's carried out, there's no going back. As Jones himself said in his final statement, someone needs to be responsible for the mistakes they've made. Next week, we investigate the shocking case of Jesse Tefero, executed in a botched electrocution, set his head on fire. Join our community demanding accountability from our justice system, because sometimes the evidence that matters most is the evidence examined too late.